It's an absolute privilege to be here with what I see as the future of our industry. You guys are going to be driving this new world of obviously Web3 and the blockchain. I guess if you come from the future, I come from the past. And I think what you need, and I think you all understand this, is anytime we're looking at future technology, we're standing on the shoulders of giants. We're standing on the shoulders of people who have built an industry in the world of gaming that was projected to be $200 billion this year. And my role here is to take you through how we got there, all the lessons we learned as we were going there, and then what the future holds for us. And I think the key is going to be that you are the future. I'm the past. I've been so blessed, as you'll see when we talk a little bit about my background, so blessed to have come into gaming at the right time in the late 90s, so blessed to have worked for some great companies, and to kind of ridden this wave, both up and down, of what the future and how technology came to bear, which we'll take you through here this morning, in making gaming, as I say, the $200 billion business it is. And I've lived through gaming being maligned, gaming being scoffed at, gaming being seen as boys in their bedrooms, and not being seen as a proper entertainment medium. And it's great pride that I now are able to take you through what we've been through, and then I will throw the gauntlet and the baton to you. So, who the heck am I? So, I was very fortunate to have had two careers in my life. I worked as a shoe dog when I came to this country, shoe salesman in sporting goods, and I got a call from an executive recruiter in late '98 saying, "What do you know about video games?" Absolutely nothing. The only thing I knew was that I bought my son Tyler a Sega Saturn, and then 6 months later, Sega had stopped making games for it, which slightly pissed me off to say the least. But it was interesting because the recruiter said, Sega's about to launch the first online console, the Dreamcast. And that really piqued my interest. And again, I knew nothing about it, but moved back from Boston at 45 years of age, changed careers, and joined Sega. At first as the head of marketing, because in those days, if you were selling sneakers to teenage boys, you could sell video games, because that's all it was, teenage boys. But it was very clear that what online was doing was broadening this horizon that we had. From Sega, I then went to Xbox, moved up to rainy Seattle, and launched the Xbox 360. And not only the Xbox 360, but started driving Xbox Live. I'm bringing Microsoft into the living room. And again, this is where we see this melding of technology and entertainment. This is where we see the power of a company like Microsoft. And my job was to go against Sony, to challenge the PlayStation, and at that time, the PlayStation 3. And we were going to do that with software. Not necessarily hardware, but with software. And the Xbox 360 launched as a living entertainment experience powered by human energy. That was our mantra in Seattle, in Redmond, Washington. And with great pride, I look back at the Xbox now, 130 million units sold of the 360. But equally importantly, we drove online gaming. We drove platforms like Xbox Live against the PlayStation Network. I then got a call, again, from an executive recruiter. It's time to come home to the Bay Area. EA Sports needs a president. And taking my Reebok experience and then building on what I'd done at Sega and Xbox, I moved back to the Bay Area to be the president of EA Sports, then moved on to be the chief operating officer of EA. And we're going to talk a little bit about that this morning, of this move away from selling physical media to digitizing our entire industry. A very difficult time, a transformation or a transition in an existing business model, but making sure that EA got off what we called the burning platform. That burning platform of selling discs to retailers was fine at the time, but like any burning platform, it was going to smolder, then burn, and then crumble to the ground. We got off in time and invested heavily in digital. The last 2 years, I moved to Unity, in between that little gig in Liverpool that you just heard about, and focused on volumetric capture, the utilization of camera techniques to volumetrically capture action on a sports field, on a rink, on a court. My focus, interestingly, was UFC, and being able to interact with the athletes inside the octagon, and learned a ton about what the future, I think, of broadcasting is going to be. Well, let's get back to the past. I remember joining, and the first thing that I had to do as president of Sega was explain what online was going to do. And they go, well, this is great. You're taking you and your friend off the couch, and then you and your friend are going to play the same game, but he's down the road and he's connected. Now remember, these are the days, and many of you won't remember, of dial-up. We had games running at 30 frames a second on a 56K baud modem. Which was great till your mom picked up the phone in the other room and then completely disconnected you from your game. But the Dreamcast was, if you will, this kind of pioneer in what we all take for granted now as hundreds of millions of people play online games. It was the facilitator to change the way we thought about the experience of gaming, but also to open up the different business models of gaming that have grown this business now, as I say, to what is projected to be $200 billion. But every analyst would say, how are you going to make money? And it was a great question at that time. And this is the lesson, I think, for all of us in this room as we think about the future business models and the platforms and the content delivery systems that you guys are building, is how is this going to make money? And I can tell you it takes time, it takes effort, a lot of heartache, a lot of financial resources, and a lot of commitment to a strategy that builds for the future. But we did that in gaming. We believed in online. We believed in what this would do to open up all of these different business models. So let's take you through real quickly. The arcade. The arcade, I joined Sega. Sega is short for Service Games, S-E-G-A. American GIs that were stayed in Japan after the Korean War were building arcade machines. And we have so much in gaming to thank for arcades. The technology of some of the motherboards that the gaming machines had became your console games. In fact, the Sega Dreamcast was built on the Naomi motherboard that we're seeing in all the arcade machines at that time. The games, Space Invaders, Pong, obviously you see Virtua Fighter here on the screen. All of this has allowed us to be able to build on this platform of arcade. And we still talk today about arcade-y style games. We still talk about the game mechanic of hooking you in the first 90 seconds so you're reaching for the quarter in your pocket, if you were. And so this element of what arcades did was build on the future, the platform, the foundation for everything else that came. We then look at retail. There's my beloved Sega Genesis, for example. But what retail did, the retailers around this world, whether it was GameStop in the United States, Game in the UK, obviously Best Buy and Walmart, they put their distribution to work. They put their hundreds of thousands of employees to work to promote gaming. They started to see that this was bringing in a younger consumer. And so we have a lot to thank at that time retailers for. And then finally, of course, they were the ones that typically sold the consoles. Because prior to that, it was very difficult for you to deal directly, in fact, impossible, with the manufacturers. You needed retail. And this is where retail really came to play. Then we got into subscription services. SegaNet came along in 2000. And as president of Sega, we needed a portal, we needed a platform to engage with our consumers who were playing on the Dreamcast, games like Phantasy Star Online, Sega Rally, even Sonic. You had these games that were played as bespoke standalone games, and we built the Sega network to be able, which we would all take for granted now, like with an Xbox Live or a PlayStation Network or even a Steam, but we needed to build that, and so subscription became key. The MMORPGs of World of Warcraft also started to become, obviously a PC game that also had a console play, but primarily PC. And so the business model changed from this kind of singular transaction of buying a console and buying a game and playing that game, typically offline, and then finishing that game, and then putting it back on the shelf or going to a retailer and getting credit for it, as you could do and still can do at GameStop, and then buying a new game. So the business model starts to evolve, and this is where the gross revenue started to build as well through subscriptions. And what subscriptions always does, particularly if you've got publicly traded companies like an EA, like an Activision at that time, is the analysts like it because it's sustainable, consistent, predictable revenue. You're not having to sell a game every single time and spend marketing money every single year on regaining and retaining that consumer. Retention is key. We then moved to free-to-play. which was a big risk for the industry that was used to getting $40 or $50 or $60 up front, that was used to be able to work with retailers and dump in 1 million discs and get $70 or $80 million back over the lifespan of a particular game. And in particular, I remember MapleStory, which is kind of a 2D stroller, which apparently, I was looking the other day, has done close to $10 billion now in its life. This idea of free-to-play, and we'll talk a lot about this later on, was a little bit of a risk. And it took into account this classic area of the inverted funnel of acquire, engage, monetize. So the idea of acquisition, the cost of acquisition, was very much, if you will, gated by who has $40, who has $50, who has $60. And then you had the risk makers. MapleStory was developed and published by Nexon, and is still out there, and Nexon still supports it. But this idea of giving a game away from free was something that was kind of very controversial. And as people involved and accountable for driving revenue, you can imagine how scary it was. You add the RuneScape and, of course, Neopets for the younger consumer, and all of a sudden, this idea of opening the funnel wide at the top, having content that engage people as actively as you could, which ultimately leads to monetization. Acquire, engage, monetize. And that was the mantra we were living to. Again, risky business when all of a sudden you're giving your product away for free. We then moved into, and this is where online was powering this kind of, and we'll get into this, the live services. Games like The Sims, Halo, of course, and Doom started to be live games. They started not just to be a game that you got and it was all loaded on that disk or on that server and you finished, but you could buy downloadable content. You could buy skins and avatars. You could have an engaging experience that was a live game. And in particular, I think of how we used Halo at Xbox to be able to drive that experience, to have people come back every single day. Of course, The Sims, which is now 30 years in, constantly being updated, expansion packs, different environments, different clothing, all of the things that gamers love and keep them coming back. And games then, it was a lot easier to just give them away for free, that opening of the funnel wide. We then moved to mobile. And certainly at EA, we were really focused on the console and PC business, and the mobile business was a challenge for us. And then you started to see games like Angry Birds and Candy Crush, and then you started to see some of the geo-based games that Niantic with Pokemon Go would do, which actually was great for the industry because A, people were learning, people were moving around looking for the things that we all did with Pokemon Go, these areas that we are geo-locked in there, and this ability to have different experiences. Of course, these were all free-to-play games as well, focused on you getting so engaged in the game itself that you would buy extra avatars, extra skins, extra content all the time. And obviously, Google Play and the App Store, as iOS and Android started to take off, was going to be key. And getting Apple and Google behind this and understanding the power of what gaming could do for their particular platforms was going to be key. This was something that really accelerated, and we'll show how that really started to build our industry towards where we are today. Then we come closer to the modern day. And this idea of games being live. Again, my career starts with games being on a relatively small disk at the Dreamcast. And now we're looking at dev teams that are as big with their live operations staff as they are with their core development staff. We're looking at games that are updated every single day. Perhaps the gold standard was the game formerly known as FIFA and FIFA Ultimate Team. And this is building your Ultimate Team that allows you to go select players and build your team to take on other people. And of course, it was done with the classic, let's open the card pack. The roots of it were sports gaming card packs in the old days where you would get your favorite players and you would trade. The idea of doing this, and I was president of EA Sports at the time, and I was pretty skeptical that it would work, to be quite honest. But my team in Vancouver were determined to give this a go. And we built out Ultimate Team. At first, we charged for it, which in retrospect was ridiculous because we were constricting that top of the acquisition tunnel. Now you can look at Ultimate Team within the game, now known as EA Sports FC. And that mode within the game is probably driving over $1 billion a year in digital revenue, and is engaging gamers in ways that they find fascinating, educational, fun, competitive, and brings tens of millions of people together. But it's a live operation service. And the team back in Vancouver, in Canada, will be as big in its live operations side as it will in its dev side. So games became live. And I don't have to tell anybody here about games like GTA 5, which is in its 5th or 6th year, and it's got constantly updated, which brings you back every single day. Of course, Fortnite, gold standard, explodes at launch with that kind of battle royale game mechanic, and was doing $300-400 million a month at its peak. And I'm not sure what it's doing now, but from that perspective, that really opened the world's eyes to what gaming is all about on a free-to-play basis. And of course, a game that demographically went from young teens all the way to people of my age. And so that, I think, Fortnite and what Epic did there, it became a pop culture phenomenon, not just a gaming phenomenon. And of course, Destiny, Activision game, again, live operations team, constantly refreshing the game. And we've come so far from my Dreamcast days, which was a GD-ROM, which was less than a gigabyte, that was a disc and you played on it, and it allowed you to have a game experience, but then you would be finished because there would be no updates. This is what I saw. This is an interview I did, 11 years ago. And I had just become the COO at EA. And I just saw that live operations, software as a service, games that would be constantly refreshed every single day and bring you back, that were truly going to be something that you look forward to. And it was dragging gamers out of the living room into their bedrooms or wherever they had the consoles. And of course, the consoles had moved to the living room because they were driving high-def experiences with superior sound. So we had this ubiquity of gaming then. When I started at Sega, gaming was blamed for all of society's ills. And it always annoyed me. I testified in front of Congress about marketing to teens, about what the gaming experience was that actually I believe was educational, that was character building, that was collaborative, that was collegial, that allowed people to come together. And the skepticism there on Capitol Hill was such of a different generation that just saw gaming as something that was bad, that was making, in fact, the UK press would often call them Call of Duty killers. They blamed everything on gaming itself. As we stand here today, and you all know this, there is so much goodness that comes out of gaming, and a lot of it is to do with games being live and pushing the technological boundaries of where we're at. Look, there's no doubt that we benefit enormously by the size of hard drives and by the speed of the broadband. We never had that in my early days at Sega, but now we have this ability for tens of millions of people to be playing concurrently, which actually moves you into subscription and cloud gaming, which is something that this audience here is going to take full advantage of. Certainly at EA, we saw the future of it being a subscription, if you will, the Netflix of gaming, in which it was more about you come back and, as I say, the benefit of consistent and predictable revenue as a publicly traded company was key. So we gave you EA Access, which would give you early access to the game, which would give you discounts on the game, and would give you access to the Vault. And the Vault would be older games that you could play as part of this subscription service. You add Google into the mix now with Stadia. You're looking what Netflix themselves are doing with games. Obviously, Game Pass from Xbox. This is the future that we see of the cloud. Now, this was always going to be governed by technology and always going to be challenged by technology of could you have a gaming experience in the cloud? And by in the cloud, meaning there is no client. The client sits in the cloud. It's not in your console. It's not on your PC desktop. It sits in the cloud. Would your latency and lag allow you to have a good gaming experience? There is no doubt in my mind that we're at that point now where this will grow again, the demographic, the accessibility that this will provide to anybody with a television set. And most of us now, those TVs are smart TVs that are connected to the internet. The tech is there, the broadband speeds are there, the memory size is certainly there, and this will be the future. And you're going to see more and more game companies walking towards this. I found this graph recently that shows you, I think, in one slide what I've been talking about, which is very much the growth of consoles. You can see how mobile, and this ends at 2020 at 165 billion. So as I say, by the end of 2023, I think we're going to be comfortably at 200 billion. But the ebb and flow since the inception of arcade, of how the PC, how arcade itself, how console have all contributed to this massive industry. Look how small we were 30 years ago, and look at where we are today. So what does this mean for the future? Well, I think that the key here, and this is where I hand the baton to everybody here, of what Web3, what the blockchain can do for gaming, and if you will, gaming 3.0. Taking through all of the transitions that I've taken you through, digital asset ownership, reduced cheating. At Xbox, we probably had 300 people that were trying to stop people from cheating and breaking up this, what was a tremendous experience, and making people angry, particularly when money is involved, and the ability for you to go in, and we think about what we can do now to track those people. You think about cross-platform play, console versus different console versus PC, console even versus a mobile phone. Bringing that together and making sure that no matter what device you've got, you can have a game experience with your friends, no matter what device they're playing on. Community governance, pushing the onus to the community to self-police, to manage cheating, to take out some of the more damaging parts of the gaming ecosystem, and the ability for you to be able to have a pleasant experience without having all of the drama that sometimes goes on with online gaming. Tokenization of in-game economy is going to be really key. We always struggled a little bit with the in-game economy of how to balance that out. Is it pay to play, play to win? But the tokenization of being able to build loyalty. How many times do you come back? What you get for coming back? What you get for playing fair? What you get for playing well? This all, the key is the stuff that you're working on, whether it's NFTs in particular, and what you can get as part of unique gifts to keep you coming back, to keep you engaged, allows game developers to monetize a lot better and a lot more efficiently. And that becomes key. And what I've learned, in particular on the Solana platform, of how the ability for developers to have clean monetization platforms and the ability to bring that is so far ahead of when we started in the early days back in the late 90s. Secure transactions, I mean, from the ability, one of the things that we always had an issue with, in particular at Xbox and EA, was fraud, bluntly, and in particular, the ability for bad actors to go into our servers and start to figure out how they could get points or coins, which then could be monetized in the gray market. And so the security of transactions, it broke my heart at times how many players would lose their account because they would give up to bad actors their password to try to get coins in there. Provenance and scarcity, key. Decentralized gaming worlds, pushing it out to the servers of gamers so that the publisher and the developer could push out and make user-generated content key. And then, of course, gaming NFTs. So that's kind of a whistle-stop tour that I've taken you through of where we've been, where we are today. And as I say, for somebody that's been involved in the industry for the best part of a quarter of a century, I push now the onus to you to take us to this next level, because it's going to be key. What should be 200 billion this year should be 250 billion in 5 years. But more importantly, giving gamers a self-secure, engaging way to have the world's biggest entertainment medium be part of their lives. Thank you.
Well, Peter, thank you so much for taking time and coming to Breakpoint and talking to us all about your career and your journey. So really appreciate that. Quick round for Peter for coming.
Thank you.
Really appreciate this. And of course, Ellie, who we both know, who really helped make this possible.
Absolutely. One of the best. And it's a delight to be here. And it's exciting for me to be here because in my entire career, it's all about learning. It's all about what is next. It's all about understanding from the past what informs the future. The old Churchill quote, "He who does not understand history is doomed to repeat it," always comes in here. And having lived through some unbelievably great times in gaming and some challenging times, it's important we understand the past.
Yeah, so speaking of that, I really wanted to dig in a little bit. You have been through several businesses that have gone through both technology and business transformations. In times when many of their peers either failed to make that transition and went out of business, or failed to make that transition and lost significant market cap. So I think it's very easy in retrospect to look at your career and say that you've had one of the best careers someone could imagine and a ton of fun doing it, but I'm sure it didn't always feel that way in the moment. How did you go about, both in these businesses and organizations, building the conviction to convince the organization or to convince yourself to make that kind of a big bet on something new?
Well, I mean, getting the organization rallied around a singular strategy is always key, and then you'll lose people who don't believe in it. And then it's as simple as that. I always remember we referred to the burning platform. That was the first meeting I had at EA. It was in August of 2007. It was at the W Hotel in Lexington and 56 in New York. I remember every detail of it. And the position that we were taking is that, look, we're selling tens of millions of discs, and everything's great. But looming on the horizon is this move to digital. And as we were seeing more broadband speeds, and John Riccitiello, the CEO at that time at EA, said, many of you will not be here next. He literally said, many of you will not be here next year because you're going to find different jobs, because the future is not for you. And you're perfectly fine employees and you're hardworking, but go find something else to do. Unless you feel, you're with me, that we're going to move away from the retailer being our customer to the gamer being our customer, and that's going to be painful. And that's going to take years of investment to build global billing systems, database management, customer service, and we're going to get tremendous abuse from our retailers who see us as abandoning them and putting them into bankruptcy. But many of us believed in it and stayed there. And my job ultimately as COO was then to build upon that and take us to the next level of engaging directly, as I say, acquire those gamers, engage with them, and ultimately monetize them. And completely different than simply selling them a disc.
Yeah, but even internally, right, it's a very scary thing to do and look at a declining revenue or a forecast of declining revenue, but also a business that at that time was still largely printing money, right?
Sure.
This is the classic newspaper problem of a massive capital expenditure, an increase in OpEx in order to go after that new customer. Businesses don't like to do that.
Well, they don't like to because the stock market doesn't like it. And so at its worst time, the EA stock price, which many of us in Silicon Valley, we're compensated with equity. Yes, we get our salary and bonus, but the real prize is if you believe in a company and you stay there long enough and you sweat and toil for that company, that the benefit will be that you can exercise your stock options or sell your shares because they've grown. And I always remember when I joined EA from Xbox, my options were at $53 a share. 18 months later, the stock's at 10. So you go, did I make the right move? But I knew that the future was digital. I knew that hard drives were getting bigger, that broadband speeds were getting faster, that gamers were becoming a little bit more digitally literate, and that retail's days were numbered as the major player. Look, I launched the Xbox 360 in Toys R Us in Times Square, and as bizarre as that sounds, I mean, you didn't piss off Toys R Us. You didn't upset GameStop. But we believed in it. And those 3 years of every penny we made, putting into the backbone of moving away from salespeople writing orders to ship discs on launch day, to network engineers going after university computer science graduates, data scientists, because we were going to mine data, because all of a sudden now we didn't have the retailer between us and the gamer. And then we could figure out in real time what that gamer was looking for, and that was the key. But it was brutal.
Yeah, it's also interesting to look at that as something where the transformation that EA and Microsoft also, I mean, the Microsoft transition from we're going to sell you a console and make money on discs, to we're going to basically give away a console and we're going to make money on a subscription, that transformation just ended in the last few years with the whole Xbox Game Pass. But it's interesting because you're basically talking about removing the middleman there. The retailer was the middleman. This is a lot of what blockchain gaming is about now too, that sort of process. How much in these organizations was this transformation? What percentage was technology? What percentage was operation? What percentage was business model change? And how do you think about how all those different components interplay?
So I joined Microsoft in February of 2003 from Sega. And we had a tough time because we believed in online gaming, but we got flooded fear, uncertainty, and doubt by the Sony PlayStation 2, to their credit. And we knew that we couldn't sustain selling hardware at what was about $150 a unit loss, selling each and every Dreamcast. The way you think about the video game business, if you're quote-unquote a first party in which you're selling your console, selling your games and third-party games, and selling accessories and peripherals, you're willing to take losses on the hardware. It's like razors and razor blades. You almost give the razor away for free because you know the volume and revenue is in the back end in selling the blades, and that's exactly what it was. Now, at Sega, we couldn't sustain it. Now, Microsoft had a few tens of billions of dollars more on the balance sheet, and so the attraction for me was I saw what they were doing, because in the last year at Sega, we started to move some of our content over onto the Xbox platform and got to know the Xbox folks there. And I saw this melding of entertainment and technology coming. In sitting down with Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer, they were petrified, bluntly, that Sony was going to own the living room. That Sony, in those days, had the televisions, had the Discman and Walkman, so they sort of had music, and they certainly had the PlayStation. And all of a sudden, the fear in Redmond, Washington was that Microsoft would be condemned to the office, condemned to be a productivity company rather than a full-blown entertainment software enterprise. And so the Xbox was a multi-billion-dollar bet and lost leader. The original Xbox, we stopped manufacturing because we were losing about $200 a box on it, so the big black-green Xbox. My job was to work with the team to launch the Xbox 360, get it out ahead of the PlayStation, launch Xbox Live, which had been launched, if you will, in a soft launch way, because we saw the future in having gamers come to us every single day. And the one thing that Microsoft had that Sony didn't have, we were a software company. And if you recall, if you're old enough, we said, you're going to pay $5 a month for Xbox Live, and we know the PlayStation Network is free, but we have a better experience. And gamers flocked to that Xbox Live experience, the utilization of blades, the ability to play your music and look at photos, and have this amazing collegial social experience with fellow gamers. We believe this is a 5-year strategy to build out gaming as a core part of the Microsoft culture on top of Windows and NT servers and PowerPoint, Excel, and Word. And the challenge, and even to the extent where we physically took ourselves away from the Microsoft campus and built our own little campus, our gaming campus, away from what we called the Borg, so that we had our own separate culture. And that was the key. And we then put out kind of an all-points bulletin, who wants to join Xbox within the Microsoft ecosystem of 90,000 people, and people came. And then people like me, the most un-Microsoft employee you'd ever find, but I took on PlayStation with the Dreamcast, and to quote Steve Ballmer, you are the type of person we need, which is to get the gloves on and start fighting. Red rings of death aside, it was fine.
You know, if we had 2 hours here, I'd love to get into the unit economics of the Pentium 3 to AMD transition.
Yeah.
But you know, it's also just like Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer are like complete visionaries to know that owning the browser mattered, owning the living room mattered, and you know, Google Chrome now owning the browser.
Well, the Department of Justice had a different view of that during that period. So for those of you, again, that don't remember this, the US government tried to break up Microsoft. It may sound weird to you, but the monopoly that was Internet Explorer, if you've ever heard of that, and the Windows platform was seen as monopolistic. And so I worked at Microsoft whilst we were under consent decree from the US government, which means they were allowing us to do business. And they were on campus reading every email.
Yeah.
So we couldn't say market domination and things like this. But this was a fascinating time where we actually bought a piece of Apple,
Yes.
if anybody remembers
Yes.
this, to keep Apple in business so that we had a competitor. We owned 10% of Apple, is what I remember, for like 150 million bucks.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit here, we don't have too much time left, but about the way that Web3 gaming is built in such a different way. Because in the traditional gaming space, we're seeing massive consolidation, right? All the game studios are getting bought by the console makers. This is real consolidation. Web3 gaming is inherently built to be open. You can build a ship in Star Atlas and you can sell it to someone else on a totally different platform, and that's a permissionless experience. How do you think that the business transformations there can bring traditional gamers and games along? Because it's a very opposite market trend right now. Web3 gaming is getting more open. Web2 gaming is getting less open.
Yeah, Web3 gaming solves a lot of the problems we've typically had. What is the gamer doing? How do we make his or her experience better? Like the blockchain experience solves for me all of the things that kept me up at night at Sega and Xbox. We just didn't know what was going on. We didn't know who the bad actors were. We couldn't track what a game is doing. And the most important thing for me as a marketer is how gaming changed from doing big TV commercials, as we did with Gears of War, and these were things, but we had no idea. We didn't even know who was buying the game because it was going through the retailer. And what we started to learn, certainly in my most recent days at Unity, and what Web3 does, is allows us to track and monitor, and not in some kind of big brother way, but what happened in the last hour in that game that we can improve? Where are the choke points? What are we seeing? How do we, bluntly, and gamers don't like to hear this, monetize them better in ways that they find value? And I always take great pride with Ultimate Team, which, look, EA would always be vilified for loot boxes and DLC and microtransactions. And the gamers of past hated that and still do. They just wanted to play a game.
Yeah.
But the future was always going to be live operations, software as a service. And look, you don't have to spend money, but if you want to spend an extra $5 to do this and have a better gaming experience, as long as it's not play to win, that was always the key. But we started at EA as long ago as like 2015, 16, started to recruit data scientists, PhDs, people that could dive into our database and analyze where gamers were going, where they were getting stuck, where we had the best opportunity to give them a better gaming experience, and fundamentally, how we could monetize that gamer in a better way, rather than just get that $60 up front at the retailer, say, thank you very much, we'll see you next year, and then start all over again to go get that. It's easier to retain than gain from the perspective of just hang on. That's why subscription services and the free-to-play games where you log in and we know who you are. And look, the key was always, I want your name, your address, and your credit card number. And so the ability for me, and look, again, and I want to be clear, you didn't have to spend money to play the game. But if we were giving you a compelling game experience, then, and I've spent a ton of money in in-game currency and economies, and had a great time as a result of that, then we're doing what you want. The great majority of people, as you all know, don't spend any money. They play free-to-play games, they play it, and they don't spend any money, but there was enough people that would justify this change into the business model. What Web3 does is the openness of everything, which I think you've seen, and as I was talking there, started to put the community in control. Here, and we used to do this with games like Mass Effect. Here's some servers, go sort it out yourselves, and you populate those servers, and call us if you've got a problem, but you guys have fun over there. And I see this as the future. Anything where you can track more accurately, where you can know what people are doing, add greater value to their experience, and as a result, monetize them better, has got to be better for the entire ecosystem.
Yeah. Well, Peter, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks, everybody.